I've paid my dues, time after time. I've died over and over again, been invaded, have invaded, toppled every boss in the game that I could find on my own without the use of guides. Played through the game as a melee character with small weapons, large weapons, played as a caster, completed a New Game Plus session. I've taken part in multi-way competitive battles. I've seen a few different endings to the game. At this point, I can't bring myself to play another second of Dark Souls 3. But I loved my time with the game, and I can recommend it with some hesitations to players who think they're up to the challenge. I realize this review is late to the party, and frankly, I don't care. Die-hard fans of the game imported Japanese versions. Larger outlets got early review copies. People who have been fans of Demon's Souls, Dark Souls 1 and 2, and Bloodborne most likely all purchased the game blindly without waiting for reviews. And I can't blame them. From Software has built up enough fan credit and earned that. So I took my time with Dark Souls 3 and savored it. Because like previous Souls games, it's meant to be enjoyed 100% at your own pace. Because that's always been part of the extended Souls universe, finding the game's pace and matching your own rhythm to it. It's not a series about clumsily swinging swords at hordes of enemies and hoping for the best. It's about trial and error, learning enemy placements, learning enemy movement and attack patterns. Like a musical instrument, practice makes perfect. As a sort of RPG, certainly you can level your character up, increase your armor and attack power, but those things won't guarantee success. In fact, every encounter in the game is a deadly one. One wrong move will set you back precious progress. There's no quick saving. When you die, you head back to the last bonfire checkpoint, and you lose all your precious souls that you've been collecting along the way. Souls being the game's one universal currency for buying new equipment and leveling up your character. Like few other games, the risk factor is set pretty high, which makes the reward factor feel all the sweeter when you finally move past whatever your current roadblock is. Working through a particularly difficult enemy placement, toppling a boss after trying dozens of times, finally discovering the location of the next bonfire and igniting it. Yes, it's a hard game in a notoriously difficult series. It is not for everyone, and with it comes a strange gamer machismo online. Not being good at these games or enjoying these games doesn't make someone less of a gamer as much as the get-good crowd would like to make you think. And quite frankly, being able to finish the game doesn't necessarily make you a better player than others. It just means you have more time, patience, and relatively normal reflexes. Because after a while, after practicing and learning a level and a monster's nuances, the Souls games, for lack of a better way to put it, become easy. You've danced the dance, you know all the steps, you know when and where to strike, when to dodge, and when to fall back entirely. To keep the musical theme flowing here, Souls games share some similarities to rhythm games. The series, and Dark Souls 3 is no different, takes a real time commitment, and people with limited schedules, like gamer parents with jobs, might not find value in it. Free time is precious, and spending it practicing such a difficult game might not be worth your time. On the flip side, if you're looking for a game that will last you a long time because your dollar is precious, Souls games might be very appealing. Physically, not everyone has amazing reflexes, and spoiler alert, all of our reflexes are going to take a massive hit as we get older. And here's where I'll bring up my first major critique, where I'll probably lose half of my viewers. The Souls games are almost completely inaccessible to new or less skilled players. And this has less to do with getting good, and more to do with physiological accessibility. By no means should the game have its standard difficulty be easier, but I feel an easier mode should be created for players who don't have the same reflexes as many of us, but still enjoy this type of content. Bosses could be way less spongy, but still lethal. Invasion gameplay could be disabled for easy mode. There are countless ways to reduce difficulty without ruining the risk and reward balance that the Souls series has been known for. The super hardcore fans of the Souls games will arbitrarily argue that using archery, magic, or summoning other players into your game is the easy mode of playing a Souls game, as sort of a cross-fan shaming. But that argument, of course, is simply overactive and misplaced pride. Personally, I feel there's a place for all sorts of combat. Some enemies are much easier to kill using melee methods, and others are best dispatched quickly from a distance before they become a nuisance. The right tools for the right job. And helping other people is sort of a core element to the game, and even its story. Leaving a genuinely helpful note on the ground will reward you with occasional health boosts if another player rates you positively. Joining another gamer's session to encounter a boss is a great way to learn that boss's patterns before you decide to tackle it for yourself. Think you're hardcore enough that you can 100% complete a Souls game on your own? Disconnect your PC or console from the internet, because reading hints on the ground left by other players makes it too easy. And looking up information through a wiki or forum, only Total Tools do that. Want to understand the lore and the story behind a Souls game? Don't look up wonderfully crafted and edited YouTube videos. A real gamer doesn't cheat that way. You need to read every single line of text within the game to understand the otherwise convoluted story. Obviously, I'm being sarcastic. Again, I find the geek on geek shaming that occurs within the fanbase a little weird. Souls games are all about finding your own groove, so if you decide to take the plunge, take your time. Try to ignore the machismo. Embrace the community, because fans have discovered and shared their awesome findings with each other, and eventually, everything will click in place. This time around, summoning and being summoned by other players is easier than ever, and that's largely due to its central hub, which is the most intuitive since Demon's Souls. One person to speak to for leveling up, one vendor for items, one blacksmith for improving weapons, one person to teach miracles, one person to teach sorcery. Not too complicated. Everyone you need to know is in one location, and there's no vendors that are actually bird fountains in disguise. I ran into a few glitches while playing the game, a few minor problems like an object or two that was missing textures, but that's not world-ending stuff. While summoning other players, I found that about 10% of the time, a summoned player would come into my world being able to move freely, but their characters would never animate and they'd be immune to computer-controlled enemy damage. It would happen the other way around, too. I'd go in to help another player, and all the enemies would move, but wouldn't make attack animations, which made for some ridiculously easy boss encounters. The first time I fought the final boss, I won because the other player I had summoned was glitching this way. I kind of felt robbed of the experience, so like any good self-flagellating gamer, I played through Dark Souls 3 again to experience it properly for myself. Even after a few patches, this problem still seems to persist. While that's sort of an exploit, it's not really one you can control. I've come across through the invasion system people who were either cheating or exploiting. Not too many, but enough to bring up. I've been invaded a few times by 100% invisible players. No telltale shimmer like the Predator, just invisible. Permanently. FromSoft seems to be trying to deal with these issues, but some players are claiming they've been bounced from the game for false positive cheating accusations. Either way, it's something to keep in mind if you want to bring your Souls game into online mode. To round out my negative criticisms, the UI is just as ugly as it was on last generation consoles. Considering it's been almost 7 years since Demon's Souls, we haven't seen any marked improvements on this UI and menu system. Supposedly, this is the final entry in the series, but if we ever do see another Dark Souls, Demon's Souls, Bloodborne game again, I'd love to see a better designed interface. And there's some really uninspired environments here. Certainly not all of them, but there are some real gorgeous levels with clever maps and pathways with some good verticality, but at the same time there are a few too many just corridors maps. Though there are some beautiful vistas to behold, the map layout isn't as good as the original Dark Souls, but it is better than Dark Souls 2. And Bloodborne's environments seem to have much more personality. The story could practically be told through the architecture there. Not so much here. But I personally don't play Souls games for the story, but an interesting story and lore is always a huge bonus. I play for the combat and the exploration. Dark Souls 3 has a real solid challenge that escalates exponentially as you progress, with the exception of the first 2 bosses, which I feel should be flip-flopped. I loved toppling bosses, not because I enjoyed their encounters, but because it meant I got to explore new areas afterwards. A few of the levels are begging to be conquered and feel totally inviting to players who want to go off the beaten path. Some of the models and textures are a marked step up from even Dark Souls 2, which only came out a few years ago. Weapons and armor look fantastic, but they could really use some work on new faces and hair. There's a lot of little changes that add up to make a big difference. The camera controls feel really good, especially if you try to go back to Dark Souls 1 or 2. Being able to rate a comment left by another player as good versus poor instead of just generically rating it feels like a no-brainer. Now you can allocate Estus flasks to restore health or mana, which is a great new little mechanic. Spells no longer have a set number of castings. Now every spell dips from the same mana pool. Spells also seem to take longer to cast than previous Souls games, even with the correct stats buffed up. This should dispel the myth that playing as a caster is easy mode, because now spellcasters need to weigh healing versus restoring mana. I played two different characters, a melee one and a caster one. Personally, I found playing as a caster was harder, but more fun. Who doesn't like flashing lights? The storytelling is much closer to the style of Dark Souls 1, and even the opening cinematic shares some similarities. I enjoyed seeing references and nudges to all the Souls games, including Demon's Souls and Bloodborne. There's a nice variety of factions to join for fighting, and now the invasion combat system seems bigger and more hectic than ever. I really enjoyed the soundtrack. There's a few songs that really stuck with me. I'm going to be the odd man and say that this is probably my favorite of the Dark Souls trilogy. Yes, Dark Souls 1 had a much better world design, and I think Dark Souls 2 did PvP a little better. But this is a nice balance of both. It has tighter controls, better visuals, an intuitive central hub, and great cooperative play. I'm a sucker for good co-op. I saw a smoother frame rate on my rig, but the game still delivers on that worthwhile Souls difficulty and challenge and fun combat. I wish the world and story had the personality of Bloodborne. Still, considering this is the third Souls-esque game in 3 years, we're looking at Assassin's Creed and Call of Duty release schedules here, From Software pushed out a quality product. I just hope that if we ever see another Souls game, we see a large bump in updates instead of a list of incremental ones. This video is made possible through generous fan donations on Patreon.